Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. This is now podcast number 5 or 6 or something like that without Chris.
The days are all just blurring
They
into
are
one,
all blurring
Adam.
into
It's
pointless existence.
Yeah, it's why bother going on
I know.
at this point?
I'll tell you why we bother, because effectively what's happened is the glory days are over. The ratings are in decline, but the powers that be have decided that there is still something of an audience clinging on that we believe we can monetize, and that therefore this is the seasons that no one will ever remember.
It's like how the band kept playing heroically as the Titanic slipped beneath the waves.
It is, and at the moment the water's up to our chest. It's freezing cold, but we are continuing on. We're
Keeping a stiff upper lip.
Keeping a stiff upper lip. It's not as good as it used to be, but anyway, that speaking there was my still current co-host, Jake Nelson. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hello, Adam. You're dressed rather more snappily than usual today, for those of you watching on video.
So essentially, I don't often wear a shirt, but sometimes I do. And because the reason I like wearing shirts is because you've got to iron them. And that's a lot of work. But this weekend, because it was boiling hot on Saturday or Sunday here in Sydney, and obviously being from the UK, too hot for me. So
I heard that the melting point of a British person is like 25.
It is, and it's too hot for me. So I stayed indoors in my air-conditioned apartment until about 6 o'clock, and it was still warm. But at least for UV, it gone down, so I wouldn't go completely bright red. And I was like, what am I going to do on a Sunday afternoon? Ironing. And that's why you're seeing me in a nicely ironed shirt rather than just the usual old tatty old T-shirt.
Oh, but Adam, now that you've worn it, you've got to iron it again. You should have just ironed it and then left it forever.
Just forever,
never have
so
to
that I
iron
could
it
say,
again.
you know what, if needs be, and probably I'd need it for a more serious. I mean, it's just obviously the podcast. You'd use this for once a decade for a job interview or court appearance, that kind of thing. But no, I think it looks all right, actually. It's quite nice.
Yeah, so this is the Australian Aviation Podcast and Fashion Review.
I did actually used to write about men's fashion back in the day, and there's nothing to it as well. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Certain colours go with other colours, certain types of clothes go with other types of clothes, and the rest of it is just an industry of total faff. Anyway.
Well, there you go. Valuable insights that you would not hear on any other aviation podcast.
You certainly won't. Let's steam into the news. So one of the biggest stories of the week was the release of the not snappily titled BITRE data from a Department of Transport. And this particular data set basically looks at on-time performance, so how many delays or cancellations there are, how on-time different airlines are. Now, this would have been very unremarkable 4 or 5 years ago. But essentially, post-COVID, as a lot of you will know, we had a lot more delays and a lot more cancellations. Because we didn't have enough staff, we had a lot of things going wrong, and this was particularly in 2021. The airlines have obviously begun hiring back more people, and things, in theory, were meant to get better. They haven't necessarily. Now, at the end of last year, in December, the Transport Minister, Catherine King, basically quite an angry sort of statement that she released. I think it was for probably the last time this data set came out, and basically said the public have a right to expect better from their two major airlines, that you're spending all this money on tickets, but in reality there's a very high chance of delays and cancellations which are well above or below.
And here I thought you were spending all this money on bundles of contractual rights, Adam.
Well, yes. Anyway, so she came out and made this kind of a big intervention and said, it's not good enough. And so now we've had the next set of data. Now, I was taught at school that, they say lies, damn lies and statistics. Anyone can make anything out of statistics. All the airlines, there's news of this. We had Qantas and Rex specifically come out and declare victory. Jake, tell us a little bit more. What have we learned from this?
So Qantas has said that they have for 16 months in a row been the most on-time major domestic airline in Australia. Now, the key word there is major.
Major. Hello.
Because we are talking Qantas versus Virgin specifically. So Qantas in these statistics tends to look at the statistics that lump the Qantas and Qantas Link services together because they both operate under QF. So of Qantas and Qantas Link services in December, 69.5% took off on time. Now, this is compared to 62.1% of Jetstar flights and 56.5% of Virgin flights. So, yes, by those numbers, Qantas was the most on-time major domestic airline in Australia. Please note the giant flashing neon sign that says major.
But major airline is effectively a phrase they've kind of invented. They have decided that they're only going to compare themselves against Virgin because, funnily enough, they happen to be doing slightly better than Virgin.
Well, also because Virgin's the only one of, I guess, any real comparable size. Even after the administration and the cutbacks, they've still got one of the largest fleets in the country with all those 737s. And those other 737s.
If in an alternative dimension we were to somehow get rid of this phrase major airline and we were to say that Qantas had to compete with all the airlines in Australia, they would surely still be number one, Jake, wouldn't they?
Not if you ask
hello.
Rex, because Rex has gone in and basically put the boot into both Qantas and Virgin, as Rex is wont to do, because last month... Now, I will note, as a caveat, the BITRE data does not separate out Rex's regional Saab operations from its domestic 737 jet operation. So this is across all Rex services. But last month, Rex services 74.3% departed on time, 70.6% arrived on time. Now, this was compared to Qantas's 69.5% on-time departures, 67.8% on-time arrivals. Virgin was the worst of these three at 56.5% on-time departures, 54% on-time arrivals. Rex did do very well on cancellations. Just 0.6% of Rex services were cancelled. That is compared to 3.7% for Qantas, 7.5% for Virgin. Rex, in a press release, typically vicious, as Rex press releases tend to be, they do not spare the rod. Rex said the Qantas Group could take consolation from the fact that while its cancellation rate is a disgraceful 600% higher than Rex's, it could still boast that it is not at the bottom of the barrel, since the Virgin Group's cancellation rate is 1,150% higher than Rex's. And John Sharp, the deputy chairman of Rex, in typically
a polite man, a nice man, heart on his sleeve kind of fella. I'm sure he'd only have nice things to say, Jake.
In typically colourful language, he said... He again accused Qantas and Virgin of slot hoarding, the old story that has never quite gone away. He said they cancelled these slots at the last minute to game the system, quote, callously ignoring the pain and suffering caused to hundreds of thousands of passengers every year. So a bit of righteous indignation from Rex there on all our behalf. I will say at this point, even Rex, with its lofty 74.3% on-time departure rate, was worse than the long-term average of 82.2% on-time departures. On-time arrival rate, 81.1%. The one area that Rex has done better than the long-term average is cancellations, which are at 2.2% on average. So Rex is doing better than the average on cancellations, but even Rex, the best of the three, is still doing worse than the long-term average.
I mean, this whole thing is you completely point out is that they're all doing significantly worse than the long-term average. Some of those numbers are absolutely appalling because I know Qantas, in fighting their ACCC allegations that they sold tickets to flights that were cancelled, they came out with some tosh, effectively, where basically said you don't actually book. When you book a flight for a specific time, you do it knowing that it could well change. And so you never really book for a specific time. You just hope that the airline will get you there roughly at that time. I'm paraphrasing.
A bundle of contractual rights.
A bundle of contractual rights, exactly.
You should get that on a T-shirt.
You should do. When in reality what happens is you pay your money expecting to go at that particular time, but knowing there is a chance, for example, for a a weather-related reason that could delay you, but you book it expecting essentially to get on there. These numbers are still absolutely pathetic. And it's kind of like one of these absurd things. It's like when you have a boxing match and at the end of it, two fighters raise their hands and declare victory. The Catherine King had every right to come out and say what she said. People do expect a lot better. From Qantas' point of view, this feels like a really bad PR move for them because obviously they're under a lot of pressure. People are really, really angry with them still. And so to kind of declare victory and to say, we've been number one for 16 months in whatever tenuous way you've gone about trying to prove it, it does seem very tone deaf. Like, surely you need to get to the point where you're hitting the long-term average before you start celebrating. But you're sort of saying I'm the best of a bad bunch, basically.
In fairness to Qantas, they did say that their results, quote, still show significant room for improvement in absolute terms. So they have acknowledged, yes, we could be doing better.
But this is like one of those pathetic, like, non-apologies, like that, because you're saying like they're celebrating this victory, they're showing off, they're putting down their major rival, and then there's like a caveat. They've gone, wow, yeah, but we can all improve. So the fact you've gone and said this undermines that caveat, doesn't it?
It sort of does. Yeah. Look, until the airlines are substantially improving their performance, they should not be coming out, celebrating how well they're doing at on-time performance. Any press release from them should really be groveling on their hands and knees and detailing the specific ways that they are going to improve their performance. Then, once they get performance up to halfway acceptable levels, they can start celebrating. Completely
agree. Now, if Qantas, Virgin, Jetstar and probably Rex had a bit of a shocker, Bonza were in a world of trouble in December. Well, what's happened here?
Horror show for Bonza in December. It debuted alongside Rex in November on the BITRE tables at the top of the class. But in December, it went right to the bottom. 52.6% of scheduled Bonza services last month took off on time. This was down from 73.3% in November. Cancellations went from 4.2% to 19.4%. Across all the domestic and regional carriers for December, this was the worst performance on both of those metrics. I think, though, Virgin did beat... I think Bonza did beat Virgin on on-time arrivals, so they do have that. Now, this comes with a significant asterisk, and that is, of course, that in December you had I've called it in the headline a debacle because it was.
Great word, I love that.
Love the word debacle, fiasco, schmozzle. They're all
kerfuffle. I like, yeah.
It's stoush. We love a good stoush here.
Very Aussie word, that one. Go on.
But this debacle with the Gold Coast was really what drove down the performance for Bonza, because if you recall, last month Bonza was all set to go. It was selling flights for December on its west leased Flair aircraft from its Canadian sister airline, and then it was forced to pull all of these flights because CASA had not yet approved Flair to fly those routes under Bonza's air operated certificate. So Bonza's Gold Coast base was not actually able to get off the ground, literally or figuratively, until December the 19th, which is when CASA finally gave them the go-ahead. So Tim Jordan has come out and said, look, if you take the Gold Coast out of the equation, for the remainder of the Bonza network, the cancellation rate was 3.75%, which is, roughly middle of the pack, sort of around Qantas levels. So, yeah, absolute shocker of a month for Bonza. But if all of the flights out of one of your three main hubs are cancelled for almost 3 weeks out of the month, that's going to eat into your on-time performance.
I do understand that, but it works both ways, because if you're a smaller airline, you've got a less of the potential things that can go wrong. So they obviously had a very good month in November, but it works both ways. If you want to be in the charts, you've got to you've got to say that's going to happen.
Tim Jordan has said since getting those approvals in January, there has been a significant improvement in performance. I mean, hard to get worse, but a significant improvement in performance. January on-time performance, as at the 21st, was 76%. January cancellations at 1.66%. So on-time performance of 76%, interestingly, compared to Rex's figures from last month, would be better. So we shall have to see what the BITRE data says for January. But look, it's a shocker.
We've all had bad months. We've all had off months.
I'm willing to chalk this up as an aberration due to extraordinary circumstances. And to be fair, across the Australian aviation industry last month, there were some pretty extraordinary circumstances. We had a cyclone shut down Cairns Airport and, storm cells up and down the East Coast, flood various other airports. So coupled, of course, with the issues at air services, which some of these airlines like Qantas have noted. Some of these factors are outside the airline's control. In fact, I believe Qantas said that these weather and air traffic control issues, these uncontrollable factors, accounted for 8.2 percentage points of on-time performance in December for Qantas and 7.9% for Jetstar. Factors outside the airline's control were responsible for roughly half of all Qantas and Jetstar's cancellation for the month.
Yes,
it said that 75% of its flights in January so far have departed on time.
Yes, well, the way it should be working is that 100% of your flights should be taking off on time, and it should be the weather that's knocking it down to that 80%. So again, it's like you can play around. You can play around with statistics. What do you think there's much chance that we're going to see this situation get any better this year? Because what was meant to happen last year is the airlines were meant to hire people back, the airports were meant to hire people back, and by this point we should have been back to normal. But now, with everybody well stocked, it feels like the airlines are running out of excuses. Yes, you have the weather incident, but do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we're going to get to see 2018, 2019 levels of service?
It's a good question. Qantas and Virgin are bringing in a bunch of new planes. So that should help. The fleet sizes are at the highest I think they've ever been for Boeing and Airbus. So more planes. I know that Jetstar's been on a big recruitment drive, and Bonza is of course always looking for new people to help man its services. I know that Bonza is also expecting a 5th plane. So more planes, more staff. Hopefully that should help. But it's not been a great time for the airlines in terms of on-time performance. They really need to be lifting their game.
They do need to be lifting their game. Consider this not a formal warning, but a tap on the shoulder and a word in your ear from Australian Aviation that it's time to, time to get your act in gear.
That'll sort it. That's them told, Adam.
I can imagine Vanessa Hudson, head in the hand, shaking.
There is right now in the Qantas CEO's office a bright red flashing light going off with a loud klaxon.
Yes.
They're going to pick up the direct phone that links them to our offices any moment now.
Yes, I can imagine. Yes, it's like in Air Force One, the call comes in. This is an emergency. Okay, welcome back. So the next story we're going to talk about is a story that I wrote. Because occasionally I do like to put the rubber gloves on and actually do some work.
It's always an event when that happens.
It is always an event. So this is that airfares actually went up in 2023, despite ACCC warning to airlines. So essentially, under the previous government, the ACCC were, at the start of COVID, kind of commissioned to do quarterly reports on the aviation industry. And these quarterly reports were basically meant to look at how the industry would restart in the wake of COVID, because you had a lot of market share change quite rapidly. Obviously, you had fleets changing all the time. We had airlines moving into routes they wouldn't previously have moved into before. So this ACCC quarterly report was set up to make sure that nobody did anything dodgy during that kind of COVID recovery period. Now, at the end of 2022, we had a situation where airfares got some of the highest in history, particularly in terms of kind of discount tickets or cheap fares. And the ACCC gave effectively a warning to airlines, and they said, in the next year, as you get into 2023, airfares need to come down. And this was obviously at a time when we were starting to see airlines post record profits. And of course, the airlines would say this sort of stuff is out of our control. This is just due to pent-up demand. Obviously, a lot of that is total tosh, because obviously if you're banking on hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, you could use those profits to lower the airfares. So effectively what the ACCC has said is that as you get into next year, you need to put more services on, you need to get more planes in the sky, and you need to bring down prices. What actually happened in 2023 is that prices went up. Now, the problem is that, to the airlines' credit, they did sort of heed the warning of the ACCC. And the capacity did go up. More planes are in the sky. They did do everything they said they would do. One of the issues is they've obviously been affected by the same thing everybody else in the world has been affected. So obviously inflation, cost of living pressures. They've also had a number of things go against them that they wouldn't have expected. So in 2022, at the end of 2022, we started to see the price of jet fuel go down from obviously the high from when we had the Russia-Ukraine war, and things to continue to go down in the first half of last year. But then in the latter half of last year, what happened is those jet fuel prices went back up again. And again, we've still had problems with inflation. We still have problems with the economy. But nonetheless, it still cost more to fly last year than it did the year before. And obviously, this again ties into what we were talking before with delays and cancellations. You are paying more money than you should be to fly, and you've got a worse service.
Rant over.
That was a rant, but I was therefore hoping the rant would lead to some incisive analysis from yourself.
Incisive analysis. Airfares do need to come down. Obviously, if there are factors outside of your control, you can't blame the airlines for those. But as you noted, Adam, Virgin Australia back in the black for the last financial year. Qantas posting bumper record profits. Maybe some of those profits should be invested in improving the airfare situation.
Yes. The other aspect of this story is when I did it, I used our good friends the BITRE data. Now BITRE is able to look at prices kind of generally, but what the ACCC were able to do in their quarterly reports is actually kind of personally go and get data directly from the airlines, and also to kind of adjust it for inflation. And what they said in their last quarterly report, which I think was back in June, is that they saw an underlying situation where prices were coming down a little bit. But until we see those ACCC reports come back, we don't know exactly what the situation is, because we don't have access to its information as good as they will do. Now, the Morrison government basically decided to end those quarterly reports in June last year. They effectively have not been going on for 6 months. Catherine King, the new Transport Minister, has decided to kind of restart them, but they want to restart them in maybe more of a different way. So their idea is the ACCC will again report on the industry, but they want to do it in such a way that I think it's more measurable and there could be more action taken. So rather than just the ACCC saying, this is not very good, and pointing their finger.
Down with this sort of thing.
Yes, you will see more.
This sort of thing being airfares.
Yes, this sort of thing being airfares. Then the government will be able to step in and act. This is also going to happen in conjunction with the green/white paper, which is basically the government attempting to come up with a long-term plan for the aviation industry all the way to 2050 to try to make it more competitive. So hopefully when these reports do start again, we will actually have a better idea of exactly what the situation is.
Stay tuned to the Australian Aviation Podcast for this for all of our incisive analysis.
This is the BITRE special, of course, as demanded by listeners. They want data. We've got data.
Is it relevant data? Maybe.
Maybe.
But it is data.
It is data, right? Anyway, that's the end of my terrible reporting. Let's go back to the expert. Now, a story that we spoke about, I think last week or the week before, was as we're now calling it, the Battle for Bali. And the Battle for Bali started because initially Qantas requested the ability to fly extra flights to Bali, and because there's limited capacity from certain airports, they have to kind of apply. You have to go through the formalities of applying to put these flights on. The reason they're keen to do more Bali flights is that for some reason I don't understand, Bali is the destination that Australians want to go to. I don't like Bali that much, to be honest, but that's probably a different rant, and I don't want to upset the good people of Bali, but I don't think it's a great destination.
Well, let's put it this way, Adam. You know Ibiza?
Love Ibiza, of course. It's great.
It's like that.
Yes. An area of Spain. I do like to apologise on behalf to any Spanish person listening for the crimes and atrocities of the British people to a number of...
This is your revenge for the Armada. You guys have been playing a long game.
Yeah, no, there are whole swathes of Spain that have had any Spanish culture ripped out, mercilessly ripped out, till there is only Union Jacks and Champions League football present. No, I do apologise on behalf of the nation for that. But yeah, anyway.
And what, like Greg's and Weatherspoons?
I never apologise for Greg. Greg's is fantastic. Have you ever had a Greg's?
No, I've never met him.
No, he's not a hit. No, he's think of him as the greatest pie maker that there is, but he does pies as pasty.
I don't know. You ever had a Mrs. Max?
I haven't. No.
You ever had a 4 and 20?
No, don't think so.
You should get on those, Adam.
I will do. I love a pie. I love a pie. Anyway, where are we? Anyway,
you say this in the meat pie capital of the world, Adam. You better be prepared.
Well, you claim that.
You better be prepared to bring receipts.
You claim that. But yeah, I would say have a Greg's first. Now, anyway, let's get back to Bali. So essentially, yes, Qantas wanted to put on more flights because obviously it makes total sense. Bali is also one of the international destinations that has recovered the quickest from COVID and is also forecast to grow in future. So Qantas put their application in for this, thinking it would be something of a formality. I think within a week or so, Virgin kind of made a counter-offer, and because there's limited capacity, only one of the two could win it. It then took quite a nasty turn in the sense that Qantas basically came out, and it would be Jetstar that would be operating flights. As the Qantas group came out, and they did some kind of, not dodgy, but creative analysis and said, oh, well, actually, if you ever have a look, you'll find that the Jetstar flights are considerably cheaper than the ones you would get from Virgin, which may well be true, but obviously Virgin's a kind of a hybrid airline rather than a pure budget airline, and you get different... you get different service for your money, so you can't exactly compare them. But then we had Virgin come back and effectively accuse Qantas of relying too much on overseas-based crew and said, if you give the flights to us, you're kind of giving it to true blue, decent Australians, pumping the money back into the Australian economy. That was also a slightly unfair comparison, considering that Virgin put on very, very few international flights now compared to Qantas, so you can't really say. And then out of nowhere, the union have decided to get involved in the battle for Bali. Firstly, read out your headline that you're very proud of.
Yes, TWU joins the Virgin trenches in the battle for Bali.
The battle for Bali. The battle for Bali. Go on.
It's almost as good as Rexit, Adam, I think.
Rexit was excellent, to be fair. Rexit was excellent. But the battle for Bali, you've given this a level of grandeur I'm not entirely sure it deserves, but we're going to call it the Battle for Bali now. That's stuck. So the TWU have joined Virgin trenches in the Battle for Bali. Hey, so tell us more. What's going on here? Why have the TWU get involved?
Yeah, so the TWU have they've written to the IASC in support of Virgin's bid, basically saying that they have been won over by this promise to employ directly hired, locally based crews. The union said that these would significantly contribute to the growth of local aviation jobs in Australia. So Michael Caine, the National Secretary, he wrote to the IASC saying, quote, prioritising directly hired local aviation jobs is essential to the long-term stability of the aviation sector in Australia and maintaining a high level of safety and service standards. Virgin's commitment stands in Qantas with Jetstar, and in contrast, with Jetstar and Qantas's heavy reliance on internationally based crews, which concerningly have been shown to be paid as little as $2 an hour for an Indonesian-based crew. It is in the interests of the industry, airlines, airport workers, and the travelling public for these additional services to be allocated to Virgin Australia, boosting local aviation jobs and representing a positive step towards rebuilding a sustainable and viable aviation industry in Australia.
The problem is, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, and they may well have been asked to make a formal submission. Presumably they didn't necessarily have to so overtly take one side or the other, but there is, to use a youth term, more beef between the TWU and Qantas historically than there is between TW and Virgin.
No cap, Adam.
Yeah.
No cap.
Right. But and obviously Virgin recently secured a deal with the TWU, a pay deal. So how much of this do you think is their legitimate thought, and how much of this is simply old wounds, old rivalries running deep?
Look, there's probably some from column A and some from column B. I do think that, like, if you want to get the unions on side, promising more local jobs is obviously going to be a good thing. It's going to work in your favour. Virgin also did that whole thing. I think it was late last year they made the announcement that they were going to be insourcing a bunch of the jobs for ground handling. So they've brought a whole bunch of ground handling jobs back in house, which has helped them as well in their relationship with the unions. Because you might remember there was some concern over whether cabin crews would be striking or taking industrial action over Christmas. So at the time, the TWU was very banging on very hard about Virgin. Keeping up its end of the bargain, promising making sure that it promises to increase pay and conditions, after that pay freeze that the TWU agreed to during the whole COVID administration thing to make sure that the airline kept flying. They were coming. The TWU was going very hard on Virgin, very hard on Bain Capital. To try and sort of win support for this new enterprise agreement with better pay and conditions. So I think that now that that's all sorted, the TWU are probably wanting to make nice with Virgin again, and especially considering again this whole insourcing thing and this idea that Virgin is promising. That these jobs will be done by Australian-based crews, contributing to Australian-based jobs, which is something that the unions want.
But if you were Qantas, their argument would be that Virgin can't necessarily compare, because after Virgin came out of administration, it now has a very limited international schedule, which doesn't really compare to Qantas, which is still flying to lots of major destinations. And Qantas would argue that they want to employ Australian crew, they want to have more Australian staff, but there is a talent crisis. It's not always easy to do that. And it's unfair to take more with this brush of saying, well, you're just using these all overseas crew. They would say that's not an unfair comparison. The other interesting thing with this is that for whatever motive a TWU does or doesn't have, them going on the side of Virgin is an extremely powerful endorsement. And it's once you look at these disagreements, like 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, the TWU was getting quite aggressive against Virgin. You had this sort of intervention from Richard Branson, and I don't know how involved he was or not, when he basically came out in a meeting of staff and said, "Look, you need to get this sorted out." And now Virgin, the TWU have gone being very angry with Virgin to all of a sudden being back in their corner, fighting against Qantas. This does show the power that unions have. In a lot of industries, they may not have power, but in the aviation industry, they're still very much a major player.
Yeah, and it's always good for the workers when they can have. When they have the power to get these better conditions, they should take it. There are arguments, around what happened with the collapse of Ansett. Was Ansett making too many concessions to the unions? You can't really blame unions for wanting to get the best deal possible for their members, aviation workers, they do very important jobs. They do very hard jobs. Flight attendants are on their feet all day up and down planes, probably dealing with unruly passengers, and unfortunate incidents like bodily fluids up and down the aisles in some unfortunate cases.
Or presenting a podcast of us two idiots, which is the worst case scenario.
It's horrible. Or I think there was a guy. I heard about a guy who got so aggressive he had to be duct taped to his seat. I think this was it might have been in America somewhere. So they do hard jobs. They do deserve to be paid well and treated well.
And one of the issues that I would say is that unions in the aviation industry are so important in Australia in particular. Is obviously if say you are a flight attendant, you don't have many options. You effectively have an option of Qantas or Virgin. Generally, and because we have such little competition compared to almost every other major country, you need something to fight for your rights, because otherwise this kind of duopoly can make it very, very difficult. It's also fair to say that while I understand airlines need to keep their prices down, people that work in the Australian aviation industry are paid a lot worse than a lot of other places. They're paid significantly worse than they are in the US. So you do need some kind of union presence to give them more of a fair deal.
And in America, taking up your point, you've got a whole lot of different carriers that are servicing the United States. You're a lot more spoiled for choice. If you are an aviation worker in America, or if you're a passenger in America, as to who you're going to fly with. Are you going to fly with Spirit? You're going to fly with JetBlue, Delta, American, United, Alaska, all of these different airlines, Southwest, flying all over the country. You've got a lot of choice as to where to go, whereas, Australia's aviation industry is one of the most concentrated in the world.
Right, we will move on to the next story that we're going to talk about, which is, and we've been saying this kind of off and on for the last few months, but Sydney Airport has officially declared the COVID crisis over. They have, to quote them, drawn a line under it, and they've recorded their best month since 2019. It's another kind of turning point that says that we are actually now back to normal. Jake, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so last month, over December 2023, there were a total of 3.58 million passengers through Sydney Airport. Now, this is 90.6% of December 2019 levels, 15.8% higher than what it was in December 2022. One thing that they have drawn attention to is that Australian passport holders travelling through Sydney Airport, so Australians using Sydney Airport, were higher than pre-pandemic numbers for the first time. So the number of Australians going through Sydney Airport were up 1.3% on December 2019. International travel saw a 93.3% recovery. Domestic was up, was still below 90% of 2019 levels, but this was up. It was still up 7.6% on December 2022. In total, for the year 2023, Sydney saw more than 38 million passengers. Now, in 2019, the record high was 44.4 million, but 38 million is a pretty respectable number.
To get to this point where you've actually got more Australians travelling internationally than pre-COVID is a major milestone. It does feel, though, that now the emphasis shifts on how do you persuade more people internationally to come to Australia. Now, one of the points I made during COVID is that for a lot of people, particularly weak, pathetic British people, Australia is...
So, British people.
Yeah, you can have that. Australia is seen as being a long, long way. It's it's a long, once-in-a-lifetime trip, that. And it was always going to be the case that when we saw the end of COVID, there was almost going to be a lag time in terms of Australia's recovery in terms of a tourist destination. So one of the stories I think I wrote, it might have been last year or the year before, was that we had a lot of people travelling to Australia for business purposes and to visit friends and family. But the amount of people actually going for a holiday was significantly down. And this is one of the reasons you had this Tourism Australia campaign where they ditched Kylie, the usual go-to to attract the Brits, and they got like this little cuddly kangaroo. You've seen a little cuddly kangaroo thing.
Haven't seen the cuddly kangaroo.
You haven't seen the cuddly
Have not
kangaroo
seen the
because you're in
cuddly
Australia.
kangaroo.
You probably want to shoot them, don't you, rather than admire how nice they are.
They do taste very nice.
No, they don't. This is
do.
awful. You shouldn't be eating kangaroo.
Well, I
They're
mean,
bouncy and lovely. What's wrong with you?
well, we've got a lot of kangaroos. And you know they were eating kangaroos for thousands of years before us white guys ever turned
Well,
up.
they're lovely, aren't they? Why would you? It's like what I'm saying. You shoot the kangaroos. You don't like the fact that we introduced the lovely rabbit to your country. Beautiful rabbit.
Because the lovely rabbit has eaten a fair portion of the country.
Oh, they look lovely though.
Well, I think Australia is actually the only country in the world to eat both the animals on its coat of arms, because we also eat emu.
I'm trying to think. The British coat of arms has obviously got a lion, and we're not in any lions in the UK.
No. Doesn't Scotland have like a unicorn or something?
Yeah,
That'd be hard to get.
Yeah.
Anyway, one idea, Adam, is I don't know. What if we could get Ryanair down here? You know,
You don't want that.
like I don't know, fly from. What airport in London does Gatwick fly out? Not Gatwick.
It's like
Ryanair.
Luton is one of the big Ryanair airports.
So which one?
Luton.
Luton. Hey, Luton to Brisbane for 29 quid. I don't know.
What you're basically saying is that in order to save the Australian aviation industry, what we need to do is bring hundreds of thousands of pissed up yobbo Brits on a Ryanair flight and bring them into Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Do you want to, you know, in Ghostbusters where they open the trap door and all the ghosts fly out, just hundreds of thousands of kind of drunk scousers with big cans of Carlsberg and Carling and probably Foster's as well, just kind of like throwing up over themselves as they stumble out of the aircraft. You want to unleash that misery on Australia.
It sounds like an average night on the Gold Coast.
Oh, I love the Gold Coast, and maybe that's because I'm British. The Gold Coast is full of decent people.
I'm sure they're somewhere. Getting back to Sydney Airport for a moment, the CEO, Scott Charlton, did say that, he did say that this news that Aussie passenger volumes are above 2019 levels is a good way to, he said, draw a line under the COVID era. He said, quote, December performance also demonstrates how far we have come since the start of the year. In January, we were 79% recovered compared to pre-COVID. The border to China was still closed, and there was broadly a lack of capacity on key overseas routes. By the end of the year, international passenger volumes have almost fully recovered. And we have experienced one of the strongest China recoveries of any international airport globally, with 9 airlines flying 89 return services weekly to mainland China. In 2023, we saw extra international capacity translate into strong passenger volumes in the India and South Korea markets.
So between the recovery in China and bringing in a load of drunk British people, we could well turn this whole situation around.
Yeah, and apologies to any of our listeners on the Gold Coast. I'm sure there are.
Damage is done. The damage is done. You can't.
Any of our decent, hardworking listeners on the Gold Coast, I'm sure that both of you are very upset right now.
I saw that joke coming.
So send in your feedback, and we will do our best to ignore it.
I worry that next week this podcast is just going to be me talking to myself. The weight they're dropping. We've lost Chris. You'll be dragged off air. You know, the good people, the Queensland government are getting involved. You know, the mayor of the Gold Coast. And that'll be you gone. It's
like in that Simpsons episode. They did that Simpsons episode with the Streetcar Named Desire musical. You know, it's saying that New Orleans was, you know, a horrible cesspit, and the people of New Orleans complained, and so the chalkboard gag for the next episode was, "I will not defame New Orleans."
Right, now let's go and do one. Time's almost beaten us. But we know what I really want to talk about on this show. It's not aeroplanes, and it's not even trains. It's buses.
Have you gone mad, Adam?
Buses. Well,
you've gone mad with power.
No. We need more bus stories. I like buses. I like single-decker buses. I like double-decker buses. I like those hendy-bendy long buses. I get a bus every morning. Love a bus. Love a bus and a road. decent Aussie people get decent red buses and they travel around. I want a bus story. You've defamed the Gold Coast. If you want to save your spot on this show, if you want to save your career, I need a bus story. I need it now.
You're a madman, Adam. You're a tyrant. You're undermining the entire. This is not Australian busiation.
It is now.
That's not even a word.
It is.
As a matter of fact, we did have a bus story.
Of course we did.
We did have a bus story
Lucky
over the
for
past
you.
week. This is revolving around Melbourne Airport. So don't panic. It is relevant to aviation in a way.
Barely, go on.
Melbourne Airport is wanting more improved local bus services as this sort of stoush, a word we love, about the rail link continues. So if you've been to Melbourne Airport, you will know that the public transport situation out there is pretty dire. They have got the Skybus service, which is a premium service that goes to Southern Cross Station in the CBD, and it goes to Frankston in the southeast to connect you to the Mornington Peninsula. I think they used to have other services to places like St Kilda, but those aren't currently running. In terms of public transport Victoria buses, only 4 bus routes serve the airport. So that's the 478, the 479, the 482, and the 901. The 902. Of those, only the 902 operates after 7:45 p.m. or more than once an hour. And the 482 only runs on weekdays, so it's not great for those who need to get to the airport and don't want to shell out a whole bunch of money for the Skybus. Another problem is, Jai McDermott, the Melbourne Airport's chief of ground transport. Now, he has said that Skybus does a great job connecting with the city and the Mornington Peninsula, but staff and passengers from the north and west of Melbourne, nearby the airport, are being poorly served by this lack of local buses. He says that, Melbourne Airport employs more than 18,000 people, but people who live around the airport don't have great access to buses, and cabs don't really want to travel such a short distance. I mean, if you've ever tried to catch a cab from the airport, you'll know that they want to take you as far as possible. So you can't really get a cab from the airport to your house if you live if you live nearby Tullamarine Airport. So your only option is to drive.
Call me cynical, but surely the problem with a lack of local buses has been a problem that has been ongoing, I would imagine, for a very, very, very long time. And so therefore I would say, well, why are you bringing up this now? You're bringing up this now because you are currently in a row over your train link and at what point, what form it's going to take, whether it's underground or overground.
Or wombling free.
Yes, I knew that was going to come. Or in fact, because the thing we've got nowhere near starting actually building it yet. So the argument was they actually don't care about putting on more buses for the average punter or the average worker at the airport. This is simply a way to lobby for the train station. What would you say to that?
I mean, whatever the motives here, the fact that they're calling attention to the dire state of the buses is a good thing. Whether they genuinely care or whether they're just trying to sneakily lobby for the rail link. And they have said we're still committed to the rail link. Jai McDermott has said, while we work towards a link that puts passengers first, immediate action is needed to fix the airport's woeful local bus services. So whatever their motives are for bringing it up now, it's still a good thing that they brought it up.
And I would imagine some parts of northern Melbourne, where these people live, it's even worse than the Gold Coast. Like, if you live in northern Melbourne, I mean, at least let them get to work on time
without having to drive and fill up the car parks.
It does seem quite extraordinary that this has happened. And again, I think that the Skybus does actually do a fairly good service. I mean, obviously, it's not a train link, but it's just a fairly good way of doing it. But obviously, like you were saying, it's only going from A to B. It doesn't not actually able to help anybody who works at the airport.
The one that goes to the Mornington Peninsula might have more stops. Don't quote me on this. This is just off the top of my head. But I know that the one that goes from the city that just goes to Southern Cross Station is just a express service. It does not stop anywhere along the route. Mind you, most of the route is highway. But still, it's It's a great thing. It's a fine thing if you need to get directly to Southern Cross Station. If you need to get anywhere else, not so good.
So I think what we can end the show on saying is that what we need more planes, because we always need more planes. We need more trains, and we now need more buses. So in many ways, we've expanded far beyond our remit. And I think next week we simply reband to Australian public transport.
Australian transportation.
Yeah, it's Australian transportation, and then I mean, we can take on those other industry publications in those other, and we can take that over, and then we can grow to become all powerful.
We will be all news outlets eventually.
You know how you get plane spotters and how you get train spotters. Do you reckon there's like bus spotters as well? Do you think there's somebody like now noting down the license plate?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I and particularly if you've got, nice buses.
If you are a bus enthusiast and you want to communicate with somebody on the team, it's jake.nelson at momentummedia.com.au. Send your pictures, send your anecdotes. And if it goes well, I'll give out his personal mobile number so you can communicate with him later on. Right, on that note, we are pretty much run out of time now. So I will say goodbye. I will say goodbye to my remaining co-host, Jake Nelson. Goodbye.
See you, Adam.
And I don't usually say goodbye, do I? What do I usually say? I don't know.
There's an air of finality to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's like goodbye. Like, this is it. He'll probably be back next week if he doesn't get lynched by a decent person from the Gold Coast. Anyway, it's good. Go on.
I don't think he'd be able to get down here.
Oh no, you've kicked them again. You've just booted them in. It's a lovely place. It's absolute paradise. I don't understand what's not to like. It's a lot better than Magaluf and Ibiza and all those various Greek islands that the British have literally thrown up all over. And I apologise to anybody from the Gold Coast. We will be back on this show the same time next week. But for now, from me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.